This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Joe Biden closes in on the U.S. presidency as ballot counting continues in battleground states. The UN calls for the de-escalation of tensions in Ethiopia's Tigray region. And an update on the coronavirus pandemic as Egypt reimposes strict anti-epidemic measures as cases surge. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, Canadian miner Barrick Gold posts a near threefold jump in quarterly adjusted profits and increases its dividend. And in sports, Zamalek set up an historic Cairo derby final against Al Ahly in the CAF Champions League. We start with the U.S. presidential election. Democrat challenger Joe Biden is edging closer to victory as states continue to count the last remaining votes. Either candidate needs a total of 270 electoral votes to win. The Associated Press projections show that Biden has secured 264. That's only 6 short of clinching the presidency. Donald Trump, meanwhile, has 214. A key focus now is the state of Georgia, where counting is nearly complete. That state represents 16 electoral votes, and that is enough to push Biden over the top. Now, Trump is in the lead in Georgia by a little more than 1,000 votes. Of course, it's not the only battleground state where the outcome hangs on a dwindling number of votes that are yet to be tallied. Jagruti Dave has more from Washington.
Earlier, Donald Trump giving a news conference, an extraordinary conference at the White House, where he claimed that he made repeated unfound claims of election fraud, and he claimed that he would win easily if the legal votes were counted, and he accused the Democrats of rigging the election.
So it will be hopefully cleared up, maybe soon, I hope soon, but it'll probably go through a process, a legal process. And as you know, I've claimed certain states, and he's claiming states, and we can both claim the states, but ultimately I have a feeling judges are going to have to rule. But there's been a lot of shenanigans, and we can't stand for that in our country.
Now, there have been protests across the United States over the vote count, both Biden and Trump supporters going out onto the streets. So tensions are running high in the United States. Joe Biden has reacted to that extraordinary conference that Donald Trump gave. And so have some Republicans, some of them publicly distancing themselves from the words of the president. Now, when Joe Biden spoke earlier in Wilmington, Delaware, he called for calm. And he said that he was confident that he would win, but he wanted to make sure that all the votes would be counted.
We continue to feel, Senator and I, we continue to feel very good about where things stand. We have no doubt that when the count is finished, Senator Harris and I will be declared the winners. So I ask everyone to stay calm, all the people to stay calm. The process is working.
Meanwhile, the supporters of both Donald Trump and Joe Biden are facing off in downtown Philadelphia, a major city in the battleground state of Pennsylvania. Tensions are rising in some areas as ballot counting drags on into day 3. This after polls closed, of course, on Tuesday. Biden supporters chanted every vote should be counted, while those backing Trump say any ballot after November 3rd should not count. Trump has fixated on Pennsylvania, but the Supreme Court earlier refused to block a ruling allowing a 3-day extension for receiving absentee ballots in the state. Now, for those of us reporting on the current U.S. elections, we have had to cover issues like electoral fraud and violence many times before. For some African viewers following the race, these are challenges which they see in their own elections time and again. Asta Tal has more on their thoughts on the current state of the U.S. presidential race.
When it comes to African elections, accusations of fraud or violence can seem like par for the course. These include the recent presidential elections in Cote d'Ivoire and Tanzania, where opposition parties have accused the incumbents of electoral fraud. But for America, the 2020 presidential election is the first time many U.S. citizens have had to confront these issues.
We have seen them preparing for violence, people barricading their shops and their offices, preparing for looting and violence, something that we normally experience in Africa. Can this happen in a country that has seen democracy for centuries?
As the race between former Vice President Joe Biden and President Trump gets tighter, the accusations have increased. President Trump has doubled down on claims of electoral fraud, stating he has already won many critical states. This has worried some Africans on the continent.
Trump declaring himself president in America is a very dangerous trend, especially for us Africa. Because tomorrow we are going to have leaders from all over coming to claim that they have won elections. And America is losing direction as a world leader.
It doesn't give a good image of democracy. That's not what we are used with the United States. We are used to see a country that respects rights, respects the Constitution, respects all things democratic. But now with what we see on television, we don't know anymore.
Indeed, no one knows what will happen next in the world's longest-standing democracy until all the votes are counted. Astatal, CGTN.
Well, let's leave the U.S. elections there for now and turn to developments in the Horn of Africa. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' office is now calling for the de-escalation of tensions in Ethiopia's Tigray region. A statement released by spokesman Stefan Dujarric from the office also called for a peaceful resolution of the ongoing dispute between the Ethiopian government and regional forces of Tigray. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has ordered a military operation there as tensions between the two sides boiled over. However, Guterres says Ethiopia's stability is paramount for the entire region. The statement also expressed the UN's support for Ethiopia's reform agenda. Well, Ethiopian Defence Forces have continued their operation against Tigray's regional state troops that the government has labelled as disloyal. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, in his address to the nation, said the army is successfully accomplishing its military mission in the north of the country. And now the country's parliament has officially endorsed a 6-month state of emergency announced by the Premier. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala with more details.
The mission that started after what the government said was a sudden attack on its army base by Tigray regional forces is now several days old. So far, the federal government says the country's military has already achieved a number of victories. In his second address to the nation, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said the situation has once again proven the heroic deeds of Ethiopian people.
For all people of Ethiopia, this situation has created heroes that we were not aware of. We have witnessed children who are not afraid of dying for the country's cause, their uniforms, their flag, their country, and the people in general. We have seen unbelievably brave soldiers in the army.
Many, including the UN officials, fear that the current conflict in Ethiopia, if left unchecked, could generate into a civil war. But Ethiopian officials say this ongoing battle is not between the people of Tigray and the rest of the country, but rather an operation seeking a few rogue elements in that region.
The nature of the conflict is not between Tigray versus the rest of Ethiopians. This conflict is not between the Tigray region versus the federal government. This conflict is between a very small group which has narrow vested interest, which is hell-bent to destabilize the national order and to attain and regain that is control over the Ethiopian political order.
The Ethiopian parliament has now endorsed a decree of a state of emergency in the Tigray region, and for the next 6 months, that state of emergency will be implemented with full force. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who was also the 2019 Nobel Peace Prize winner, said several attempts at avoiding this latest fighting have simply failed.
In our country, we have had thousands of wars throughout. We grew up hearing stories of wars. We have become adults in wars. Due to this, we understand war is a reason to be backward and poor. However, our attempts to avoid the war have been aborted by this hopeless force.
Ethiopia's government seems to be determined to finish the job, and at a minimum cost and casualties possible. Still, many citizens hope the conflict will be short-lived and will be replaced with a round-table conversation. Grumtara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, let's go live now to Addis Ababa, where CGTN's Girum Chala joins us on the line with more on this story. Girum, of course, the military operation now entering its third day. Give us an update on the situation in Tigray.
Well, Lindy, as you've said, the battles have continued in mostly the Tigray regional state and the bordering towns of the Amhara regional state. And this morning, the federal police has also given a press statement saying that its police forces, after they have also been attacked, as the defense forces are said to be attacked, have joined the battle. And in general, the mission now has turned itself from defense to an attack, which is the highest level that any military mission can engage itself in. This is, as we've said so many times before, this is a serious situation in the country and could have the potential to destabilize the country. But one of the generals, the highest people in the Ethiopian Defense Forces, have promised last night that this mission is underway to return normalcy and lawfulness in that regional state, in the Tigray regional state. But then again, it's also important to understand that it could be difficult, but will be short-lived, as he said. At the same time, Lindy, we understand that the state of emergency in the Tigray regional state is now being implemented. Tigray is now a no-fly zone, and transportation is also limited unless and otherwise it has got green light from this state of emergency task force itself. So engagements, military missions have continued. Some would really, really like to call this an internal war and could even graduate itself into a civil war. Things are also developing every day. On the other hand, as you have also said, the United Nations, the African Union, European Union, the U.S. government and others are calling for calm de-escalation of the situation. Unfortunately, that is not really what's happening in the country as war is continuing and expanding in different parts of the Tigray regional state. We have also heard of an attack from the air in Mekelle town in Tigray, which is also another sign of the strengthening of the defense force attack in that regional state. So, Lindy, this is what is really happening at the moment, but we will also hear more developments tonight, which we'll provide to our viewers.
Girum, for the sake of context, can you tell us why tensions have flared up in the region?
Well, this has a bit of a background of a couple of years. Since the coming into office of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, the Tigray regional state and his administration were really in bad terms. As you might understand, most of the leadership now in the Tigray regional state were federal leaders, ministers, and who've been there for almost 3 decades, including the former Prime Minister of the country, Meles Zenawi. So TPLF has been a leading political party for the last many years in this country. And all of a sudden that has changed. And so many misunderstandings and so many unlawful activities are said to be done by that party itself, according to the government. And the government claims that the Tigray regional state is unlawful, unconstitutional. It has even recently held an election which was nullified by the country's parliament and the House of Federation itself, because as the country decided to postpone its elections due to COVID-19, it has continued doing its election activities, which, by the way, is an offense under this federal government administration. So the Prime Minister Abiy's administration said it has tried to bring this leadership back to normalcy, to follow the normal activities of the federation itself. It failed, and at the end of the day, we are now into a military engagement. So many reasons there. An attempt has been made by religious leaders, famous people in this country, even the international community, and those failed. Those attempts have failed, and a war at the end of the day is now happening in that regional state, Lindy.
Right. Thank you so much, Girum Chala, for that update, joining us there on the line from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. Let's shift our focus now to Somalia, where a new cabinet has been holding a 3-day retreat to strategize on how to secure the country ahead of elections next month. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo is in Mogadishu and filed this report.
It's the first retreat since lawmakers approved the country's new cabinet 2 weeks ago. Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble and his deputy Mahdi Goulet Qadr have been meeting the newly appointed 26-member cabinet to set out priorities for the next 100 days.
I am optimistic that this cabinet retreat will provide a clear time frame for the administration to work on the critical tasks that lie ahead, including credible elections, strengthening federalism, completion of the constitution review process, and national security.
Securing the country from militant groups and holding peaceful elections dominated the 3-day retreat taking place at the heavily fortified airport compound in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. Al-Shabaab, the Al-Qaeda-affiliated group, has threatened to disrupt parliamentary elections set to commence later next month. It has also threatened to target those involved in the process, including clan elders and candidates.
In order to achieve security, the public and security agencies must cooperate together. The public must be ready to provide intelligence, and security forces must act on that information.
Meanwhile, political parties and independent candidates are accusing the government of delaying the process. As per the agreed timetable, the selection of delegates must take place in November, followed by the election of lawmakers and senators next month. The much-anticipated presidential poll has been scheduled for early February 2021.
The timetable is very tight, but the agreed objectives can be achieved if all parties show commitment. There can be technical issues once in a while, but that should not be a cause for concern.
Elsewhere in the country, campaigning is in top gear. Political parties, rival candidates, and new coalitions are beginning to meet in an effort to agree on a single candidate who will unseat the incumbent Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo, who is seeking re-election. Once again, members of the public will not have individual votes, a major setback in efforts to restore democracy in a nation rebuilding after decades of conflict. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
5 Congolese soldiers have been killed and several others injured in clashes with a rebel group. The attack took place in the northeast of the Democratic Republic of Congo. A senior officer was among the victims of the attack in Ituri province. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has more from Kinshasa.
The soldiers were killed by suspected rebels in an attack on their military base in Ezekere. The military spokesperson in Ituri province says an officer at the rank of a major was one of the victims of the attack. He says the army fought the rebels and repelled them from the area. Congolese officials have blamed the attack on the Cooperative for the Development of Congo rebel group Codeco. The group is composed of fighters from the Lendu community. They've had long-standing conflicts over land and the control of mineral resources with members of a community of herders known as the Hema. The security situation in Ituri province has deteriorated since the start of this year. The UN says more than 1,300 people have been killed and over 200,000 displaced. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
You're watching Africa Live. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Coming up, an update on the coronavirus pandemic. Egypt reimposes strict anti-epidemic measures as cases surge. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia,
Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. Turning to the coronavirus now, the Egyptian government is gradually reapplying strict safety measures after the number of daily coronavirus cases in the country doubled just over the past week. Egyptian Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli has warned citizens that the government will be forced to increase curfew hours if the number of cases keeps going up. Yasser Hakim has more.
Officials fear this could be the start of a second wave of coronavirus infections that could be more devastating than the earlier one. Many Egyptians have relaxed observing precautionary measures, leading infections to double last week's figures. At 200 infections a day, the number of cases is still much lower than the peak levels of 1,200 per day recorded in June. Health officials hope a strong emphasis on observing health regulations will help save many lives.
When the lockdown and curfews were lifted a couple of months ago, people thought that things were fine and disregarded personal health measures, as if the coronavirus doesn't exist anymore. I use the underground metro. I always hear health awareness messages broadcast on speakers in all stations, but no one is listening, and most of the passengers are not wearing masks.
The government's response this week has been to increase fines on individuals who don't abide by the outlined health regulations. Restaurants, hotels, and other service providers will be closed down immediately if they break the safety rules, such as social distancing, wearing masks, and operating at 50% capacity. But what has really caused an uproar for businesses is the plan announced by the cabinet spokesman to permanently close all facilities like shops, restaurants, cafes, and malls 3 or 4 hours earlier than usual.
It will affect us badly. If they allow us to close at midnight, it would be okay, but not 10 p.m. The workers will suffer the most, not just the owner. Egyptians prefer to go out at night and stay out late. This is the best time for our work. We could lose more than 40% of our income if we close early. I will have to reduce the number of workers here.
Some experts believe closing these facilities early is a wise move, even well after the COVID-19 pandemic.
It's not just because of the coronavirus. Closing early sustains social and economic stability. It means less environmental pollution, less energy and electricity consumption, and better traffic. It facilitates the mission of the police to maintain security and safety at night. It also allows authorities to clean the cities after shops close.
In its meeting, the government has shied away from closing schools as anticipated, but warned of a new lockdown if the numbers of infections keeps rising. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
South African pharmaceutical company Aspen has announced an agreement with U.S. conglomerate Johnson & Johnson to produce its COVID-19 vaccine once it passes all the global human clinical trials. Angela Coppola has more on that story.
Johnson & Johnson plan to produce 1 billion doses of the single-dose vaccine once the official go-ahead has been given by various international regulators. Aspen will take a leading role in meeting that ambitious target.
We are looking to manufacture around 300 million doses out of our Port Elizabeth facility. And this is quite a significant development, I think, for both Aspen and South Africa, in that Aspen and South Africa will be playing a leading role in hopefully providing what is now required to be a global solution.
Aspen's agreement with Johnson & Johnson will enable it to use its spare manufacturing capacity at its Port Elizabeth operations hub. The firm recently invested $200 million to upgrade its facility there.
It's that particular investment that has now allowed us to move into vaccine manufacturing as well. And would turn Port Elizabeth, through this Aspen facility, would turn PE into a leading global manufacturing hub for anesthetics. So Port Elizabeth won't only be supplying vaccines, it will also supply anesthetics to the world.
The South African president has been on an investment-seeking drive over the last 2 years. Aspen was one of the first businesses to take up that offer and reinvest in the country.
There is no way that we cannot welcome any show of confidence in the capabilities of our companies to make a contribution in the fight against this terrible pandemic called COVID-19.
One of the key concerns facing many African countries is affordable and easy access to any successful vaccine.
J&J have indicated that they will make half of that, 50% of the billion, available for developing and least developed markets. South Africa naturally fits in the developing category. So I think it's an immense positive that Aspen is producing the product here in South Africa.
While the world waits for the results of those vaccine trials, it's now important that the production and distribution of the vaccines is equitable and everybody on the continent gets an opportunity to take them. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A Somali doctor who trained in China and India and returned home in 2016 has opened his first advanced private diagnostic laboratory in battle-scarred Mogadishu. This after scraping money together for 4 years to fulfill his dream. The lab is the first in the Horn of Africa country, and as CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy reports, its launch came just in time given the spread of COVID-19.
Dr. Abdullahi Dini opened Mogadishu's first advanced diagnostic laboratory in January. He runs the facility together with 5 other doctors who pooled $1 million to buy equipment and set up the center. The laboratory's arrival was well timed, as 2 months later, the coronavirus pandemic reached the Horn of African country.
We saw that there was dire need for a laboratory in Somalia because tests were being sent to laboratories abroad. We proposed and established this laboratory instead of opening a hospital. We invested about $1 million to establish and buy these laboratory machines from Germany, Italy, South Korea and the United States. You can imagine we took a great risk to get reliable diagnostics.
Patients previously had to wait weeks for blood test results, but Medipac Diagnostics has now made it easier and faster to test.
The main challenge that you face when you open such a business is that it's not an easy task, but we bravely took the risk when we brought the new lab machines. You have to bring lab technicians, maintenance, reagents and kits from abroad. In case a machine stops working, you have to hire a lab engineer from abroad like Dubai.
Until July, Medipac was the only private lab in the city testing for the coronavirus. But since then, its technicians have trained government health workers to conduct tests. The Somali government has acknowledged the diagnostics laboratory for the visible mark it has made in the fight against COVID-19. Daniel Arab Moy, CGTN.
Time now for a short break. When we return, the latest from the world of business. Coming up, Canadian miner Barrick Gold posts a near threefold jump in quarterly adjusted profits and increases its dividend. And South Africa's Comair is set to hit the skies after being grounded in March.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Africa Live. Find your voice. In your business news, Canadian miner Barrick Gold has posted a near threefold jump in quarterly adjusted profit and increased its dividend. The firm is benefiting from a surge in gold prices fueled by widespread coronavirus stimulus measures unveiled globally. Higher prices of precious metals, including gold, surged to a record high above $2,000 an ounce earlier this year, have offered miners a lifeline after the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted supply chains and mining operations. Barrick says average realized gold prices rose to $1,926 per ounce in the third quarter, ending September 30th, up from $1,476 per ounce a year earlier. The African Development Bank estimated that pre-COVID-19, Africa already had an annual infrastructure investment gap of around $62.5 billion. Well, the COVID-19 pandemic may have stalled any progress made by limiting government resources for public infrastructure and sending investors into retreat. However, there's evidence suggesting that there is still wider interest in emerging market infrastructure in Africa from private investors looking to diversify their portfolios beyond their traditional markets. Institutions like the Private Infrastructure Development Group have been able to mobilize funds. In 2019 alone, it raised $2.6 billion from private sector investors and DFIs for commitments in mainly fragile and conflict-affected states. Libya's daily crude output has climbed to 800,000 barrels, and the country is now targeting 1.3 million barrels by early next year. The reopening of the last of Libya's oil fields and ports has prompted a resurgence of the energy industry, with the OPEC nations' daily production jumping from less than 100,000 barrels in September. Here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with the details.
Reaping the rewards of peace and stability, 800,000 barrels daily production is an eightfold increase since a ceasefire took hold over a month ago. According to the chairman of Libya's state-run National Oil Corporation, Mustafa Sanallah, the North African nation is targeting to pump 1 million barrels daily next month, before accelerating to over 1.6 million barrels daily by the end of 2021.
Libya's daily production reached 1.3 million barrels per day in 2018, and it could easily achieve over 1.5 million barrels on one condition. That's if peaceful negotiations and ceasefire continues. A military conflict will halt production, just like what happened throughout 2020, and this can further damage the economy.
Libya's current oil revenue exceeds $12 billion. Half of it is paid as salaries to state employees. About $2 billion goes to the rival Tobruk government in the east, and the rest to the National Accord government and the state budget. Officials, however, say the income is not enough to cover its budgetary needs or the state's expenses.
Unfortunately, one of the big mistakes of Muammar Gaddafi is that he made the country dependent only on oil revenue, yet it has a lot of potential in tourism, for example. Also, Libya oversees 2,000 kilometers of seashore. This could create a huge fishing industry that could garner billions for the country. Good use of its seaports could make it a regional trading hub in North Africa like Egypt. There is a lot of revenue sources to create.
Analysts are hopeful that the political rivals will broker a permanent peace deal to allow more oil production. The country with the largest oil reserves in Africa will need the extra revenue to jumpstart its rebuilding process after a decade of internal fighting. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And turning to Nigeria now, where the aviation industry is one of the sectors that have been badly hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. Many local airlines are struggling and have been forced to declare workers redundant. But the government has moved to assist industry players through a cash bailout. Here's CGTN's Daji Badmus with more on that story.
It had always been a question of the size of the bailout and not if the federal government will provide funding support for the Nigerian aviation industry. The question has now been answered by the country's aviation minister.
The federal government has provided 4 billion naira for airlines and 1 billion naira for other businesses within the civil aviation. We are putting criteria for the disbursement of those funds, and once it is done, it will be transparently done, and they will be so disbursed.
The disbursement of the funds is expected to begin in the coming days. It will come as a relief for an industry that was already facing serious funding challenges even before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. But some experts say the process needs to be reviewed to ensure only deserving airlines get funds.
The same minister that announced the 5 billion for the airline said that the airline are owing 19 billion and $6 million. 19 billion naira and $6 million. So the question I ask is, what is the wisdom in giving them money when they are owing? So if there are people that are not owing among the airline, it's okay. They could be entitled to the bailout. But if there are people, if there are airlines that are owing, they should not be entitled to any kobo of that 5 billion.
This is not the first time that the government is offering bailouts to the aviation industry. Hefty bailouts by the government between 2009 and 2012 failed to turn the industry around. That led to accusations that some airlines simply misused the funds.
In 2012, they collected over 200 billion. The question is, what did they do with it? Those who collected the 200 billion, what did they do with it? How many of them have returned?
It's not clear if the latest bailout will make any difference. But one thing is certain, the Nigerian aviation industry is in a bad shape. The situation worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic. All airlines have been forced to lay off staff and have also slashed salaries. Most of them are deep in debt.
The aircraft that flies, the onboard service, the airport that receives, and the parts aircraft, the engineers, the pilots, the entire value chain of aviation has been tremendously affected. If we're going to talk in figures, I mean, we've been talking about figures in the past. It's tons and billions of dollar loss.
The $13 million bailout fund is certainly low compared to what some aviation experts have said is needed to turn the sector around. But at this time, just anything the industry can lay its hands on will go some way to help address some of the challenges bedeviling an industry that needs every and any help it can get at the moment. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, staying with aviation matters, Comair, the company that runs the South African franchise of British Airways and low-cost airline Kulula.com, looks set to fly again. The company was grounded in March when South Africa went into lockdown. 2 months later, Comair filed for business rescue. But as Sumitra Naidu now reports, Comair has managed to clear a few hurdles and could take to the skies as early as next month.
Comair wants to get British Airways and Kulula.com back in the air as soon as possible. But this may happen under a new parent. Comair executives formed a company called Bitco, which will buy the airlines. The Competition Commission gave the acquisition the green light on condition there will be no retrenchments once the airlines are flying again.
I think it's extremely interesting that effectively the Competitions Board has approved essentially the takeover by the new company of the old people on the condition that jobs are protected. It shows that both the management and obviously the authorities are being extremely sensitive to the needs of organised union.
But 400 employees will be retrenched under the current restructuring. The National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa says there wasn't enough consultation.
We would prefer a situation where we do not have to go to the Labour Court. We say that we think that they are not actually trying hard enough to find an amicable solution that does not involve us resorting to court action. We want meaningful engagement.
Comair says additional black economic empowerment partners have agreed to take part in the business rescue process, but provided little details as to who they are. The two airlines might get back in the air soon, but their survival will be tricky. For South Africans international travel hasn't opened up completely as yet. There are also worries around what another possible lockdown could do to this industry.
The airline is still entirely dependent upon domestic air travel, and that means that it's incredibly useful. Link in with British Airways is not going to be really of much use to it at all. And at the same time, we're expecting Gidon Novick, the original founder of Kulula, to launch his new airline. We now know it's called Lift, effectively from the 1st of December. So that's going to make the competition even tougher.
SAA is also expected to start flying again after government extended yet another loan to help save the airline. The competition will be good news for consumers, but it may just be unsustainable for operators. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
The Bank of England has increased its already huge bond buying stimulus by a larger than expected $195 billion. This as it braces for more economic damage from new coronavirus lockdowns and Brexit. The BOE says it's still looking into the pros and cons of taking interest rates negative, but gave no update on the process. Governor Andrew Bailey says the bank forecasts were that the UK economy would not return to pre-pandemic levels until the beginning of 2022 at the earliest. Bailey also says the economy is set to shrink by a record 11% in 2020 overall. That's more than the 9.5% originally forecast in March. On Thursday, England began a 4-week lockdown to curb a second wave of COVID-19 that's led to a rising number of deaths.
Well, our objective, of course, is to set a cost of borrowing in the economy as a whole that is consistent with activity and the inflation target. Now, it's necessary and inevitable in my view that at the moment the major borrower in the economy is the government, because it's the government that has to step in and respond with public policy to an unprecedented health crisis. So it works through that channel. We always condition our forecasts on what are government policies and government intentions, and that is that there is a trade agreement. Now, any trade agreement now will have a degree of adjustment to it.
Well, that's where we leave your business news, but here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Johannesburg in your pocket. Find out about the excitement that has many South Africans clicking away on their cameras.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Right, let's start in South Africa now, where the two cities of Pretoria and Johannesburg are basking in purple. These are the colors of the jacaranda trees that blossom at this time of the year. And many citizens or locals are now taking to the streets to take photos as they enjoy the moment.
It is that time of the year when thousands of jacaranda trees paint Johannesburg and Pretoria purple. For residents, it is time to take those unique photos that capture the memories of the season.
There's something about jacarandas, like Johannesburg and Pretoria, they just have this burst of colour. And, you know, we have very green cities as far as trees go, but just to see the purple for a couple of months a year, and it's always the hunt for the elusive photo. It's like, you know, where's the best photo you can get? And it's all about trying to capture the beauty for a couple of weeks and, you know, see the city in a different light.
It's just the jacarandas are beautiful. They bring that purple punch, as I said. You know, it brings a bit of a punch of colors to the image, and yeah, and it's very attractive to the eye.
According to residents of the two cities, the purple petals give those iconic images of Pretoria and Johannesburg.
I think the relationship between Johannesburg and Pretoria is quite a strange one. As cities that are actually so close to each other and are almost, there's almost very little difference as you're traveling the landscape from one city to the next. They're almost joined to each other. And yet, if you come from Pretoria, you see yourself as a very different identity. And I think it's interesting linking up cities in that way and not being so city-centric. So I think it's also just, as I say, creating different pathways, different ways of seeing. Cape Town's always credited in South Africa as being the most beautiful city to visit. So for 1 month, we like to challenge that title with something fresh.
The cities even organize photography competitions called Jacaranda in Your Pocket. Prizes include holiday safaris to Pretoria and other local cities.
Yeah, well, we're hoping that this year we'll get a much greater crop of entries because we've expanded to 2 cities. But as a city guide to Joburg, we really feel really strongly about opening access to cities, and it's something that we try and do in all the work that we do, is to help people navigate cities. And this is so much about creating a different route, a different kind of itinerary, but using nature as your marker or as your placemaker.
The dream of winning and the thrill of being part of this social phenomenon has many participants clicking away on their cameras. Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
Here's what's coming up in your sports news up next. Zamalek set up an historic Cairo derby final against Al Ahly.